Welcome everybody to our June 2024 webinar on award increases and what employees need to know. My name is Carly Saw. I'm the Director of Strawberry Seed Consulting, and I am joined by my lovely colleague Frances, who is our Principal HR Advisor and Mental Health First Aid Trainer. And today we're going to be taking you through everything that we think you need to know about what is going to be happening with the new award increases. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land that we are all meeting on today, and pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that to any Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples that might be joining us today. So for those that are not familiar with us, we are Strawberry Seed Consulting. We're a boutique HR consulting firm that work predominantly with small businesses right around Australia. Everything in hiring to firing and in between. This is my gorgeous team. And so any of you that have dealt with Strawberry Seed in the past will have had interactions with any member of our team. And this time of the year for us is the busiest time because we do get these increases on the 1st of July. We have 120 plus audits that we're about to go headfirst into. And so these will be very, very busy people for the next month. So let's get into it. The minimum wage increase has been announced and it will be 3.75%. Which equates to a new minimum wage of $24.10 per hour. The minimum wage increase also applies to the award minimum wage. So that means there'll be a 3.75% increase to the minimum for each classification in each of the awards as well. Basically, there is an increase every year. Very much it's one of those things that you can just sort of rely on. And even during peak COVID, there was a small increase. So last year was quite significant. It was almost 6%. So, you can generally rely on it being around CPI. But this will mean an increase for anybody that is on the minimum wage, either in an award or generally, or also those that might be close to it, which is one of the things we really want to get into today, is ensuring that even if you do pay above award, that you are still paying correctly. So anyone that has sat in on one of our webinars will be very familiar with a version of this slide, because we do like to start by going through what laws actually govern employment in Australia, because it's really important to understand that going in. And I will say, as we do go through, I should mention that if you do have any questions at any stage, pop them into the Q&A box and we will spend as much time as we need to answer them all at the end. So the foundation of our laws on employment in Australia is the Fair Work Act, which came into play in 2010. So it's been around for a while now, and it is updated on a fairly regular basis. So the Fair Work Act applies to all employers and employees in Australia and sets the minimum standards for everything we need in terms of employment. And it contains the National Employment Standards, which include things such as what the minimum termination notice is, all the different types of leave, etc. And so that really underpins everything, and it is the starting point when we are looking at any laws. The next level is the industrial instrument. Now, today we're really focusing on awards. That's really our focus. You may also be under an enterprise agreement that might apply to your business or to your particular industry. But a lot of enterprise agreements have set increases already in them. So we're really going to focus on awards today. And awards can be for a particular industry or a particular profession. And our third tier is the employment agreement. Now, if you pay people as per an award or an enterprise agreement, you actually don't have to legally have an employment agreement. But the reason we recommend them, and they're a good idea, is often they contain clauses and information that is not covered purely by the award or industrial instrument or by the Fair Work Act. So if you don't have a written agreement, you have to go exactly by what is written in there. Whereas if you, for example, set a salary that might be inclusive of some overtime or some allowances or you pay above award, it is highly recommended that you do have a written employment agreement that actually states that. And there's also some good protections in there around things like confidentiality and intellectual property and obligations as employees. So we do recommend them, but really today we're going to be focusing in that industrial instrument area. So as I mentioned, you can have an award that will look at either a profession or a industry. And the award will actually set out the minimum employment conditions for either that industry or profession. So that could be things like in different classifications of employees, what their minimum wage will be, what breaks apply, what penalties, loadings, allowances, shifts, lots of information that is going to be really important when you are trying to calculate whether or not you are paying your employees correctly. And I think we need to understand that some awards, for example, the Health Professionals and Support Services Award, it covers an industry. So, for example, if you're an allied health practice in private practice, you will be covered by that award. And that award not just covers allied health practitioners, but it also covers support services staff as well. However, in other professions or industries, for example, building and construction, the trade-based employees are covered by the Building and Construction Award, whereas clerical employees aren't covered at all by that award. So therefore, they'd be covered by the Clerk's Private Sector Award. So some businesses may find themselves with 2, 3, 4 or more, depending on how it applies in their particular business, awards that cover them. And you need to understand that there may be differences in those minimum conditions of employment to different employees. Now, there are some businesses or professions, more than businesses, that are award-free. For example, accountants, HR is an award-free industry. But even in a business like ours, where the majority of our employees are award-free, which means we don't have that middle tier, we have the Fair Work Act, and then we have the employment agreement, we do have administration staff, and those administration staff are covered by the Clerk's Private Sector Award because they don't work. Whilst our business works in the profession of HR, their profession is covered by that award. So it is important to understand that, and it will be very, very helpful going into the next steps. So if you are looking to find the award and have a look through at the details of it as it applies to you, we highly recommend that you always go to the Fair Work website to actually access the most recent copy of that award. Because look, over the years, I've seen people get in trouble because they've saved down a copy, or they go to a website where there's a saved PDF copy on the website and it's no longer the most current one. So it's always best practice to go directly to the Fair Work website, and then you know that what you're looking at is the most current award. And here's how you know. So here's a snapshot of the Health Professionals and Support Services Award. Now, while we would love that when Fair Work announces in, fairly early June that this is the increase, that immediately they would update all the awards. Obviously, they have more than 100 awards that they have to update. So at this time of the year, our team is madly hitting refresh every couple of hours on the Fair Work website to see when awards have been updated. But what I've circled there in red is a statement that it's at the top of each award that says this incorporates amendments up to and including, now this is the current version, the 1st of July 2023. So if you went on to do a check now and it still said the amendments were up to and including the 1st of July 2023, that is not including the changes effective from the 1 July 2024. So we've got to wait for those to be published. And the reason why we wait is because when there is an increase and the Commission get together and assess all the submissions from industry bodies and unions and lots of other places about what the increase is going to be to the minimum wage. They also take submissions about other changes as well. And every now and then there can be a change made for a specific classification within an award based on a submission being made. And look, whilst the majority will go up by the 3.75%, there is always the chance that there might be one classification under a particular award that could be increased by more. So our rule of thumb is we do not start doing any audits until those new rates are published by Fair Work, because then we always know we are working with the right details. And now I'm going to hand over to Frances, who's going to get down and dirty with the details on how to make sure you're paying correctly.
hopefully not down and dirty, but yeah, we'll go through the classifications and checking employee salary from here on in. So a good port of call, as Carly's just explained, is understanding what award is applicable to either your business or to your employees. The next step in that process would be actually to check what classifications are featured in that award and what might be applicable to your team members. Usually Schedule A of most awards will have a list of definitions of each classification, and you'll see there that we've just put a little snapshot of the support services level 1 definition there. Classifications do tend to be quite general. So you do have to take a little bit of interpretation with that to make sure that you are specifying your employees correctly. Now, depending on your award, classifications may change with a change in role or responsibilities. We usually see people or employees progressing through classification points if they gain more responsibilities or experience. You may also find that people will move through classifications for a specific time period. Usually that can be 12 months of full-time employment, or it can be prorated for part-time employees per calendar year. Or you could find that someone's starting either very fresh into the industry or on a training rate, and they may increase their classification slightly quicker. I had a question the other day, how do we monitor that? What do we put in place to check on people's classifications? And really, it's up to you guys how you can make that work. We do benchmarking, as Carly's mentioned, for our support clients once a year. So we will check everyone's classifications at that point. However, you might like to put calendar notes in for workplace anniversaries, etc. You might have apps, you might have anything that you can have that will just remind you that maybe it's time that someone needs to progress through their classification points. Now, 2 things are going to happen when the rates change. You're going to look at your team and you're going to go, right, okay, I pay everyone at the award minimum rates. Now, that's absolutely fine. There's no problems in that. But you will have to increase your employees' pays effective from the first full pay period after 1st of July. And you'll have to do that in line with the rate changes. I did just want to note as well that it does stipulate it is the first full pay period after the 1st of July. So if you have a pay cycle that actually ends on, let's say, the 3rd of July, your pay increase will be applicable from the 4th of July, because that will be your first full pay period. So I just thought I'd pop that in there just for you guys to know. So it's always good, and we're going to go through a massive list of things you need to check, but 2 of the first things you need to do are check what classification and check the new pay rates. And as Carly mentioned, pay guides are also updated in the award, and they also stipulate what date they are effective from. So always go into Fair Work and check that you've got the right copy. Second thing that will happen is you'll go, oh, it's okay, I pay all my employees above award rates, which is awesome, fabulous, brilliant. So what you need to do is actually check and see if your above award rates are still inclusive of the minimum award rates from July 1st. So if you pay a flat rate for everyone's working hours, or maybe it's an annualized salary, you will still need to check if what they're working now and what they're paid now will still be applicable under the new rates. And that's what we call the Better Off Overall test, which is a dirty, dirty word this month and next month for everyone at Strawberry Seed. We often refer to it as benchmarking or BOOT, and BOOT essentially stands for Better Off Overall test. So before you do either of those 2 things, you do need to take into consideration what's happening in the business as a whole. So you need to ask yourself a few questions, and anyone who's a support client will know that our benchmarking data information collecting sheets are probably about, I don't know, 20 or 40 columns long of information that we need to know and understand. So have a think about things like, has there been any changes to your trading hours or even your trading days? Have you maybe expanded out to a weekend? Have there been any changes in employees' hours? Has anyone moved from a Monday daytime to a Thursday nighttime, for example? Has anyone changed roles or responsibilities? Has anyone had that work anniversary? Has anyone had a change to their benefits? And lastly, not only has the employee had a birthday, which we should all celebrate anyway, but we're referencing that in terms of junior pay rates. So generally, awards will stipulate that junior pay rates are sort of between, well, it can vary, but 15 up until 20, and it's usually 21 years old that determines adult pay rates. But again, check with your award because that can vary. So you need to have a little think about if anything has changed. And like I say, we ask our team, we ask our clients all these questions because these are the things that we need to know to include into the boots. So I'm going to run through some boots for you. And again, support clients will probably look at this and go, oh, that looks familiar. So I've got a few examples here for you just to run through. And I'm going to talk at a very high level, but of course we can come back and clarify any questions you might have later. So my example boot is Betty. She works 22.5 hours a week, so she's a part-time employee. Now, 15 of those are considered in her ordinary hours, and 7.5 of those are considered outside of those in a shift work pattern. Betty's paid a flat rate of $30 an hour for all the hours she works, and she's currently in the Health Professionals Award as a Level 3 support staff person. Now, you'll see there I've put 2 rates of pay. Now, they are the current rates of pay. They do not include the additional 3.75%. Now, you'll see there that there's 2 scenarios at the bottom. I've got one with leave loading and one without leave loading. Now, I will come to leave loading at the end of this section, but I just wanted to illustrate that there are 2 separate ways of including leave loading. So you'll see there on my first column, the award hourly rate. So the yellow is the award minimum, and below that is the employee at $30 an hour. We then check what hours are worked in the week. As you'll see there, 15 ordinary, 7.5 in shift work. We then have the calculations of what those hourly rates equate to. And that usually, hopefully, gives us the answer as to what we need. So we can see there that the weekly pay and the minimum annual salary for those hourly rates at those hours per week. Now, you'll also see there on the end, minimum boot rate. So the minimum boot rate there for the top row with leave loading would be $27.41. So as a combined rate, it would need to be at least $27.41 if you're going to include leave loading. And below that, you've got $27.17. And that would be the minimum boot rate for without leave loading. So $27.41 or $27.17, we can see that that is actually lower than the $30 an hour. So we know that Betty is being paid better off overall than what she would be if she was receiving the award minimums for the hours she's working. Now, second example is very, very similar, but it's for Bill. He works a 38-hour week, so full-time. He works all ordinary hours, and he's a level 2 pay point 4. So he gets paid an annual salary of $80,000 per annum, not including superannuation. It totals $40.49 per hour. And the current award rate, as I've mentioned before with Betty, is either $39.63 or $39.10, depending on whether you're going to include leave loading or not. So again, just to reiterate, there's the hourly rates that we have in there for Bill. There's the hours. And of course, he's only got ordinary hours at this stage. That's the calculations, and that's the end result. So we can see there, it's all green. We know that Bill being paid $40.49 an hour is better than the minimum boot rate there, calculated at $39.63. So that's all brilliant. Everyone is being paid above award rates. They are better off overall than what they would be on the minimum award rates. Now, why do we do this as much as working out that they are being paid and compensated for correctly? We also need to know what the outer limits are. And this can absolutely be shared with your employees because if you are paying an inclusive rate, you have a wonderful offset clause that stipulates that your pay will be inclusive of, let's say, allowances, loadings, etc., penalties. You need to be able to demonstrate what is actually included. So, okay, well, in Betty's example, she has shift work. So the penalties are included in that. If you had someone that did Saturday work or overtime work, that would assumedly be included. But it's a really, really good practice to be able to demonstrate what is included. And we call that the outer limits. So now we've got Janet, good friend of Bill's. She works 38 hours a week. She's full-time. She does all her hours in ordinary time span. Again, level 2 pay point 4, she's paid slightly more than Bill at $45 an hour. So again, we've got the hours, we've got the calculations. What we have added in is overtime. So by adding in that column, I can then calculate that Janet has a little bit of buffer. And I know that Janet can work it's actually up to 7 hours in any given week, and I can still pay her $45 an hour for those hours. So I will be paying I will be paying $45 for the 46 hours she works in that week, and still know that she is better off overall. Now, if Janet then works 8 hours in a week in overtime, I know, because it's red at the bottom over here, that $45 an hour will not compensate her adequately for working 8 hours of overtime. So sometimes we refer to that as the tipping point. So we need to know what these outer limits are. We tend to use overtime hours as the outer limits because they tend to be the highest penalty rate. In this instance, in the Health Professionals Award, the first 2 hours is 150%, thereafter is 200%. And that's fairly similar across multiple awards. So we tend to use overtime as a guide as to what the outer limits are. Now, you can absolutely use anything else. If you don't have any overtime rates, you might want to calculate some additional shift work hours. That's absolutely fine. It's just about finding the tipping point and knowing that if someone then works over those stipulated hours, that's when we need to compensate them further, because there's a chance of underpayment. So hopefully that makes sense. And if it doesn't, please chuck a question in the Q&A and I will absolutely come back to it. I'm more than happy to do so. And I did just want to touch on leave loading. We do get a lot of questions around leave loading. Multiple awards, and obviously please check yours if it's relevant. Multiple awards, though, will have 17.5% of an annual leave loading, and that applies to the 4 weeks of leave per annum. So there's 2 ways of paying this. You can pay it across the year, so you can divide it down and pay it into the hourly rate, or you can pay it when the person takes leave. So they would get a little bit extra in their pay packet when they go on holiday, which of course is lovely for them, might not be great for the business in terms of the finances. So just as a quick snapshot, we've got a little bit of our calculations here just to sort of demonstrate how it works. So if you look at level 1 there, you can see what the ordinary hours are. It's $23.97 an hour. That translates to $910 per week, or $47,000 per annum. Now, the leave loading component of that, which is on the right-hand side there, is taking the annual leave loading at $637.60. So that is 4 weeks calculated with a 17.5% loading. We then divide that down into weekly and hourly, and that's what we add to the hourly rate to include leave loading. Otherwise, you'd be paying the $637.60 as and when the person took annual leave. And again, any questions, pop them in the Q&A and we'll come back to that. So the big question, do I have to increase my employee's salary? Look, you have to check. Absolutely, you have to check. This is why we do benchmarking every year, to make sure everyone is compliant. Again, if you're on minimum award rates, yes, absolutely you do. If you are no longer paying enough, or enough that the employee is better off overall, then you must adjust the pay rate to the correct level. If, however, your employees are still above award rates and they still pass the boot test, so they are still better off overall, then any increase is voluntary. You don't have to do it. Your obligation is to meet the minimum requirements from the award. Obviously, having that conversation with an employee might be a slightly trickier subject, but it would be voluntary as long as you are meeting all the minimum award requirements. So how do you set a salary? And again, we get this question an awful lot. Use the award minimums as a starting point. That is your base level. We know a lot of industries that will have, I suppose, higher market salaries than what the award stipulates. But the award minimum is what we always compare back to and what we benchmark against. So when you're setting a salary or when you're looking at reviewing people's salaries, absolutely check what the market value is at that point in time. You can do that through your professional association, research, Seek, Indeed, two great resources, and they absolutely have salary guides. Recruitment agencies, you could look at Hayes, Robert Half, they all have salary guides. So you can absolutely plug that in and see what comes out as to what the average would be in your area for that profession. And you also have to consider retention and attraction. You know, we want to be able to keep good employees and we want to be able to attract the right talent. So you do have to consider all those things. Unfortunately, we can't do that. We have to rely on what the award minimums are for benchmarking. So do consider all the other bits and pieces, but absolutely your award minimum is a really good starting place. What's next? What do you need to do once July 1st has come and gone, which will be here before we know it, I have no doubt. So do your benchmarking if you need to, or we do that for you. Or if you're on minimum award rates, then you need to check what rates those are. You will then need to communicate any changes in writing to your employees. That can be a simple letter, and that can be featuring all the key details. So what your salary is and may move to, when that's effective from. Also include any things like classification changes, role changes, etc. Confirm all of that also. Importantly, don't forget to update the payroll system. I'm sure it's happened in the past, so don't stress if you don't, but make sure you do put the new rates into Xero or MYOB or whatever it is you happen to use. And process any back pay if applicable. I know employees do have a sense of urgency about getting pay increases done and dusted for multiple reasons. If you have to take extra time to quantify, review, check through people's salaries, you can always backdate this thing. You can always absolutely say, we're going to change it. It will be from the 1st of July. Just communicate that to your employees. If you think it's taking a little bit longer or you need some more time, tell the team. Just let them know we are reviewing it. Please don't stress. We will include any back payments if necessary. But don't fret, you can do that if needed. I'm going to hand back to Carly now.
Okay, so I'm just going to touch on a couple of the other changes that we think that people should be thinking about at this time of the year. And the first one is superannuation. So the superannuation guarantee has been gradually moving up over the last couple of years. There was a plan in place to get it to 12% by 2025. So hopefully next year in 12 months' time, that'll be the last increase we see for a while. And it'll be nice to have it back to a nice round number because it always makes it harder when it's a decimal placed percentage. So essentially what that means is from the 1st of July, everybody in Australia, their superannuation has to be a minimum of 11.5%. Obviously, some people do pay above that. Whether you adjust, if you're already paying your staff 12%, whether you increase it by 0.5% is completely up to you. But as long as you're hitting the minimum of 11.5%, that's what you need to be reflecting. Now, if you pay your employees, a salary of say $50,000 plus super, you just increase the super, in this instance, and that's all you need to think about. But where we do get a lot of questions this time of year is when people have presented salaries in an employee's employment agreement as a total remuneration package. So they've said, instead of saying you're getting X amount base salary plus X amount super, you present it as your total package amount, inclusive of base salary, superannuation. It may also be vehicles and other benefits. And for sake of example, these are $100,000. So we always get asked if someone's on a total remuneration package that's inclusive of everything, do we have to increase their super? Now, if you have a clause in their employment agreement that states any increases to superannuation will be absorbed by the employee's package, then legally, no, you don't have to increase their package. Their super will increase, but their base salary will adjust down to accommodate the increase in superannuation, and the total REM package can stay the same. If you say in your employment agreement that you have a total REM package of $100,000, but you do not have a clause in your contract that expressly says that you have the right to offset that increase and keep the salary package the same, then you must pass on that increase to the employee and not offset it within their current package. It needs to be expressly said for you to do it, and because that means the employee has expressly agreed to that. Now, that's what you can and can't do. Just to go back, sorry, Frances.
Sorry.
I just wanted to touch on as well what the unintended implications of that might be if you decide to leave that employee's salary as $100,000 per year and have them absorb the difference in superannuation. Because look, if you give salary increases this time of the year anyway, and you were going to increase their package to $105,000, then it's probably not an issue because it'll all just work out in the wash there. But if you don't give any other increase to their package at this point, then their base salary will decrease. So you're essentially taking away some of their take-home pay. And whilst you can argue that their total REM packages stayed the same, I can assure you that most employees will not see it that way, because you're essentially taking some of their pay away to offset an entitlement that pretty much almost everybody else is just getting as an additional thing to their superannuation. So we always ask you to be mindful about the unintended consequences of making those decisions. I understand it is a cost to your business. Of course it is. It's a cost to every business. But if you've got a valued employee in a position that might be hard to recruit for and you want to retain them, it can send a message to them that they are a cost. And that's how you consider them if you automatically just say, well, no, you agreed to that and we're not going to be increasing your package. So, and it can create that culture of what's in it for me, and they become very much about their entitlements as well. So it's completely up to you as an employer if you have that clause that whether or not you make that adjustment. But it's just something we highly recommend that you consider, because sometimes from a cultural perspective, it can have a very big impact when you don't, because then people start to become resentful. And it's the same in a number of ways when it comes to whether or not you need to increase a salary. So if employees are still meeting the better off overall test, as Frances mentioned, you don't have to increase their salary because there's no legal reason to do it. But that doesn't mean that they don't understand that it's been all over the news that there's a 3.75% increase. I would ask the question, when is the last time you reviewed their salary? Maybe you left it the same last year due to cost of living has gone up. So if you're not passing those, making some adjustments to people's salaries, you may find they start looking around elsewhere, because they will. And if you're in an industry where there is, a bit of competition for people to work for you, retention, as Frances mentioned, has to be part of it. So I think that's just something you need to consider. Thanks, Frances. So what else is changing? Now, I would love to tell, you know what, when we do this, unfortunately, Fair Work don't always update everything in time for us. So one thing that also increases on the 1st of July is the application fee that an employee would have to pay to Fair Work to make an application for an unfair dismissal or general protections or other claim. That $83.30 is the current fee, because as at 6 p.m. tonight, they still have not updated to say what the new fee is for 2024. But that goes up every year. It's indexed. The other thing that goes up every year is the high income threshold for unfair dismissal cases. This actually only went up today. We've been checking it for the last couple of days. So what that means is an employee that earns up to $175,000 a year has access to unfair dismissal. Again, this has just gone up from 167,500, I think.
Mhm.
And so what it means is that if employee earns more than that, then that excludes them from the unfair dismissal remedy if there was an issue and they have to go through contract law instead. And it also is an indexed adjustment to the maximum that somebody can receive as compensation. It's always 26 weeks of an employee's salary, but of course the maximum gets indexed up along with the high income threshold because it has to be 26 weeks of the high income threshold. So that also is indexed, and all of that applies from the 1st of July 2024. Now, before we start jumping into some questions, and we usually find in these sessions we try and leave as much time for questions as we can because we get a lot of specific questions and we'll do our best to answer them all. I do want to touch on some legislative changes that are coming, and they're coming in the very near future. We've had the closing the loopholes legislation passed at the beginning of this year. We had a change of government 2 years ago, and that means there's been a few changes over the last sort of 18 months to announced and implemented around employment. So there's a couple I want to focus on today. The first is the casual employment definition is being updated as of August this year. This one's quite interesting. There was a change about 2 or 3 years ago on this definition, and it has been updated again, which essentially takes it back to what the case law was prior to that last change. So the new definition, and I'm going to read this directly, is a casual employee is an employee who is entitled to receive a casual loading or a casual specific rate of pay and has no firm advance commitment to continuing in an indefinite work. And there are a number of factors that get looked at whether to assess whether they're a true casual. And that's the true nature of the employment relationship and really what's happening in practice. So essentially what they look at is, prior to this change, it went back to, look, if you're getting a casual loading and the contract says you're a casual, then you're a casual. But what they're bringing it back to is this person a true casual? And, that change in definition means there might be some changes in who may be seen as a casual. And, the sort of factors that they'll look at to sort of assess whether there's a firm advance commitment. You're looking at things like, is there a regular pattern of work? Is there, can the employee genuinely accept or reject work? Can, the employer offer or not offer work to the employee? So a good example of that is, do you have a roster that is done every 2 weeks, and your casual employees can say when they're available and when they're not available, and you do the roster and it comes out 2 weeks in advance, and then they can say, oh, I'm not available for that, and chop and change. That's true casual employment. But if there is an expectation that you're a casual, and I've seen an example where there's a casual that has worked a 4-hour shift every Saturday morning for 2 years, and that is all they do, then there's a fairly high chance that they could end up being seen by the true nature of how they're working as a part-time employee, because there is no irregular pattern of work. There is no chop and change. They probably have to ask people if they can take leave and, take time off and things like that. So they're the kind of things that will be looked at. And so some of the things you might want to do is, really think about who actually still really would be a casual under that definition. You definitely need to make sure you're giving the Fair Work information statements to any casuals that start, that tell them their rights. And it's quite interesting because there's a right for employees to ask to be converted to a permanent employee. And why it's interesting to us is, in our experience, it generally tends to be the other way, that employers are the ones asking employees to move to permanent work, and they're really keen to stay as casuals. And that's fine, but if you've got someone who's moving into a pattern of work that really would look more like permanent employment on an ongoing basis, then you should at least be offering them permanent employment. Now, you don't have to do that when you can show that there's a reasonable likelihood that there might not be future work. For example, over the peak period of Christmas, you might have pretty regular hours available for someone for a 2 or 3 month period, but at the end of that busy period, the chance of them still having, that much access to work is going to change. So that's not necessarily going to be, that's probably a good reason not to have to offer them permanent employment. I had an example today, and this person might be on this webinar or listening to the recording that I spoke to this morning. And she was mentioning she has someone she knows who has a business that relies on a third party to every month tell them how much work they need from them next month. So if you've got casuals working, they don't know until they find out for the next month what that third party's needs are. Then they know what to offer their casuals. So in that instance, they only know on a month by month basis what their needs are for the next month. So they'd probably have a fairly strong, reasonable argument on why they couldn't convert those casuals to permanent employees, because they themselves don't know what the need is going to be from a month to month, or whether there will be a need in the next month. So it's just something to have a think about. The other thing that is changing is the definition around employees and employers, which is going to have an impact on the definition of independent contractors. So to determine whether an employee is an independent contractor, the sort of things that are going to have to be considered under these changes are the real substance, practical reality, and true nature of the working relationship. So in a similar way with casuals, it doesn't matter what it says. You might have a contract that says they're an independent contractor, but if the way they are actually operating day to day actually is reflective of an employee, then you may find that they will be seen as an employee. And, you know, they're going to look at the substantive way that it's actually working in reality, in a lot of similar ways to casuals. And look, to be honest, we see people get in trouble with casuals in the same way they get in trouble with contractors. There's two ways they get in trouble. One is that they never should have been a contractor or a casual from day one. I've seen a tradesman have 6 employees as 38-hour casuals. They were never casuals. They were full-time employees from day one, okay? Casual and permanent employment is not interchangeable. You can't be a part-time casual. You're either a casual or a part-timer. They are different forms of engagement and have different entitlements. And, you know, I like to say you can't be half pregnant. You have to choose which way you're going. So, you know, but someone might start off as a true casual. They might work irregular hours and have time off and things like that. But then over time, they move into a set pattern of work. You rely on them. You rely that they're going to be doing those 20 hours a week every week. That's when you need to reassess you know, the situation. And the same with contractors. They might start off as a true contractor, but you really like each other and you both work together really well. So suddenly they're no longer working anywhere else and they're just working exclusively for you. You do need to reassess that they haven't actually moved across to being an employee. And these changes to contractors aren't reflected in in any way on how the ATO looks at it, because ATO and Fair Work have two very different ways of looking at it. There are some similarities, but the ATO has a different motivation there about, am I getting the most money out of everybody? Whereas Fair Work are looking at it, are these people being treated fairly? And I think as employers, we need to be careful that, again, part-time and casual, not interchangeable. They're different, and so are employees and contractors. So your starting point needs to be what is right for your business and the role that you're offering. And the third change that is coming in August, it will be coming in for all employers, but this year it's coming in for those with over 15 employees, is the right to disconnect. And so again, I'm going to read this to make sure I get it absolutely perfect. Employees will have the right to refuse to monitor, read, respond to contact or attempted contact from an employer or third party outside their usual working hours unless that refusal is unreasonable. So, you know, hopefully for most workplaces, this is not going to be an issue, because I don't think that, you know, there's a lot of workplaces that don't have an unrealistic expectation that employees are going to be working when they're not at work. But I think that this is going to be really interesting because it hasn't been tested. It's brand new legislation. So what is considered reasonable? Now, an example for me, I can think of that has come up with one of our clients in the past of what is reasonable is we had an employee who happened to be going through an unfair dismissal. So of course was bringing up all their grievances. And they said, oh, they contacted me on my day off. Now, the reason they contacted her on her day off is the whole phone system had gone down and they needed a password to boot it back up again. And she was the only person who knew the password. So I think that would be seen as a reasonable circumstance that you can contact someone on their day off, or, you know, because the entire business has come to a stop and you're the only person that has that information. So maybe look at putting some processes and systems in place so you don't heavily rely on one person who's not always there. But I think we just need to be mindful that employees will have the right to do that. And really the point of this legislation is to protect employees. So if an employee says, no, I don't want to be responding to your emails at 8 o'clock at night, and it's unrealistic for you to have that expectation, this legislation protects them for having some sort of action taken against them. they're terminated, they're have their hours cut or something as a result of that. So it is something to think about. If you're over 15 employees, it's coming in August. But I think as employers with under 15, it's coming in eventually anyway, so you might as well get prepared for it. So every year we have other considerations of reviewing your arrangements with contractors and casuals. That's part of what we talk about every year, because things change, they change with hours and other things, but they also change with the nature of how people are working. So it is a really good time to have a bit of a review and see whether any changes need to be made. And before we just get on to a couple of questions, which we will do very shortly, just to let you know, these are the topics we've come up with for the rest of the year. We're going to talk about parental leave, some improving team communications. We're going to do an industry-specific webinar for hospitality, restaurants, wineries and distilleries. And Frances will be presenting on psychological hazards in the workplace in November. If you have any topics that you would like us to cover in one of our webinars for next year, please feel free to pass them on to us. We're always happy to get suggestions, and we're more than happy to sort of put them on the agenda. You can find copies of all of our previous webinars online as well. We have some public leadership training coming up for the second half of the year. We've already done Brisbane and Melbourne. We've got Fremantle, Sydney, Torquay, hopefully Adelaide in November as well. That is going to completely depend on whether I get some expressions of interest for Adelaide, but we've already got people registering for these sessions as well, which is great. There is an early bird special if you book early. If you're a client of Strawberry Seed, reach out to your HR advisor, because there are discount codes available even during early bird that you can use. But all of the information can be found on our upcoming training page, and the link is on there. You guys will get a copy sent out to you of all of this too. And mental health first aid is also coming up. Frances is our mental health first aid trader, and she's got a blended face-to-face course on the 5th of July in Melbourne. I think we've still got 1 or 2 spaces left for that. One of our clients who didn't have quite enough people to have an in-house session has been happy to open it up to some people externally to attend. So if you are keen to attend that, give us a call or get in touch with Frances. There's still time to register, and she may even throw you a sneaky discount code if you mention this webinar.
Can do.
Which I've just put on the spot and told her now.
Perfect.
So I encourage you to follow us on all our socials. We do actually put a lot of information about these changes that are coming in. We advertise about our training coming up and things like that. We now have a TikTok channel thanks to our Gen Z in the office. They have finally forced us, and we're doing some videos, short videos, answering a lot of frequently asked questions. So please follow us there if you're there. As I mentioned, you can find all our previous webinars, and a copy of this one will be on YouTube, and also on our website. And you can also jump on our website and register for our newsletter as well, because we also send out a lot of information. But now I know what you really want to do is get us to answer some questions. So Frances is going to read out some of the questions and we'll answer them. And then if you've got any other questions you can think of you'd like us to answer, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A box now.
All right. So first question we've got for casual staff in support services. What if they don't take breaks?
Well, they don't
question.
get to choose whether or not they take breaks. You get to choose whether or not they take breaks. You need to be careful, because if they're not taking their breaks, there might be an obligation for you to be paying them penalty rates after that break was entitled to be had. So you're allowed to give a lawful instruction to your employees, and a lawful instruction would be, no, we want you to take your breaks. If they choose to sit at their desk and work through their lunch break, you can't sort of do too much about it, but you need to be able to demonstrate, if it ever came up, that no, you've told them to take their breaks and you've directed them to do it, and they're making a choice not to. So it's not a good habit to get into with people, because it can make a big difference to what their entitlements are.
And just on the back of that, I would imagine 100% of the awards, and all the ones that we certainly have that are popular in our remit, have breaks outlined in the award. So they are governed by awards in general.
And some of those are going to be, if the employee does not get a break, they are on time and a half until they do get a break.
Yeah,
so
exactly right. So another question there, if someone is a level 3, I'm assuming still in the support services, can be an autonomous, responsible, etc., but they are not performing to this level, can they be downgraded to level 2?
Classifications are not based on your performance, they're based on the position, the responsibilities of the position. So if they're not meeting the expectations of the responsibilities of the position, then they need to be performance managed and given the opportunity to either fix it or maybe performance manage them out of the organisation, because, you know, the classification is not attached to the person, it's attached to the position, and it might be their experience does indicate what level, but it's particularly for support services, it is the position that is classified, not the person.
Another one that we might need to clarify a little bit on, for casual work, is there an after hours loading? The person that wrote that in there, I'm not going to name names, obviously for privacy, but you might want to just clarify that, because in short, yes, if we're looking at Health Professionals Award, there is what is called shift work, but that has to be maybe a regular occurrence. So yeah, maybe if you can clarify the question there, we'll come back to that.
Because yeah, there is a difference between if someone's working regularly outside the span of hours, it would be considered shift work. Whereas if it's just sort of a one-off, it comes under other penalty rates. But generally speaking, if someone's working outside the span of hours, there would be some sort of entitlement to extra compensation.
Yeah, absolutely. Does leave loading apply to annual leave entitlements above the 4-week minimum? Some of my staff have purchased leave arrangements, 6, 8 or 10-week entitlement.
No.
Great question.
It is a very good question. Gold star for that question.
Yeah.
No. So because purchase leave is a benefit, it's not an entitlement. It's something that you've instigated as a benefit. So no, that wouldn't attract leave loading.
Beautiful. Thank you for the person that commented that we've got some great upcoming topics for our webinar. So thank you for that. Another question, should we be doing a new employee agreement after a certain amount of time and a couple of wage increases? Okay,
so when you don't need to give a new employee agreement unless there's been changes to the conditions. So if there's been no changes to the conditions of employment other than the fact that you're updating their, hours of work or their rate, a change of conditions letter that says effective from this date, your new rate of pay, I did one literally today for one of my team, your new rate of pay will be X amount per hours, all other conditions remain unchanged, is perfectly fine. When we tend to see a new employment agreement is when they're, so for example, some of our clients might come to us and we might help them come up with a new template agreement that suits their needs better and meets current needs. When you're doing increases, might be a really good time for all existing employees to reissue those new employment agreements because it's part of their salary increase. If you haven't updated your employment agreements in sort of since the beginning of last year, Francis, would you say, beginning of 2023, there's been a couple of changes since the beginning of 2023. We literally upgraded all the templates for all of our support clients last year and all of our templates. So if you haven't made any changes, they might be time for a bit of a review to make sure they are meeting the current standards. For example, they can't have pay secrecy clauses in them anymore. For anyone that you're giving out as a new agreement, then yes, maybe it's a good time to update and reissue. But generally speaking, unless there's been changes like that, there's significant changes. For example, if you were promoting someone to a salaried role and now they're going to have 4 weeks notice, whereas previously they were hourly rate and they had the minimum, then that would be a new employment agreement. But if the only thing you're changing is their hours of work by agreement or their rate, then you can just do a change of conditions letter.
Another point as well in terms of reissuing or issuing different contracts is if you're moving from casual to permanent, that's another good time to do it because there are different entitlements and quite often different clauses and terms and conditions. So if you're transferring employment type, that's another good time to do it as well.
Yep.
And last but not least, unless anyone's got any more, and I know the answer to this one, Jess, before I answer it, is the boot calculation sheet available on your website?
The answer would be no, Jess, because that is our IP. That is how we make money sometimes, is we can do it for you. And it's not as simple as saying here's one that would work for everyone, because we literally have different ones for different awards, different industries. We have some nice complicated sheets depending on, how people are paid. So there might be 10 different options on how to do boots as an option that we work out which one's the best one to use for how you pay and how you work and whether you work weekends and whether you pay over 1 week or 2 week rosters, and there's so many different variations to it. So, and we've put a hell of a lot of time, particularly Francis has put a hell of a lot of time into our beautiful gigantic spreadsheet.
Yes.
So look, we're more than happy to sort of, like we have today, share sort of a general idea on how to do it. But, there's a reason that we get paid to get into depth, and a lot of people outsource it to us because it's not always simple. And if it's simple, you can do it yourself, but can be time consuming. So no, we can't share that with you.
We've just had clarity as well on the outside of hours. So on after hours loading for casual, there are no regular hours. It varies every week. If the roster has 22 hours one week and the employee stayed back and worked 24 hours, assuming they are on a minimum rate, would they be paid extra 2 hours at the same rate or more? On other weeks, work can be up to 30 hours. So this is for a casual.
If you're talking about a casual, they'll get paid the same rate. It doesn't, like, they're paid for the hours that are worked. So a part-time employee that's rostered, that has on 22 hours a week, if they worked 24 hours, they would be entitled, if they were paid at the award, to overtime, or they'd have to be paid enough above the award not to receive extra. With a casual, up to 38 hours, they're just going to be receiving the same rate unless they slip outside of the ordinary hours span. In, like we sort of mentioned earlier, where there might be a shift work allowance or a penalty rate allowance. We'd have to look into it specifically and see how it worked, what your span of hours was, because there's several spans of hours under this award. But yes, there's a good chance that it would have. No, if it was just within the ordinary span of hours, no. But if it's outside of that, then the answer would probably be yes.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, one more sneaking in. Oh, that's fine. You're more than welcome. That's it at the moment for questions.
Well, hang on for another minute or two if anyone does want to ask us anything more.
Yes, I now have one more.
One.
If you currently pay someone a boot wage with an extra 2 hours and they have a contract for this, but they never work the extra, can you renegotiate their contract to just 38?
They would have to, well, so you're still paying them 38 hours a week, but you're paying them at a rate that incorporates, so that you don't have to think about it when they do. So you can always negotiate someone's rate down. I would be staggered if they said yes. They would have to agree to it. You couldn't just adjust it. Look, it also has the benefit of paying them a little bit more. It gives them that might be putting them, higher on market rate. And, if they are looking at other jobs out there and they realize that, what you're paying them is a little bit more. We have clients that literally ask us to set their rate for them to include 2 hours of overtime every week, so they never have to think about it. Like, we have clients that ask us to run their boots that way. So legally speaking, yes, you can have a conversation and ask them, but again, the unintended consequences of that, it may just be that you don't necessarily increase their salary by too much, but you might find, given that last year was, put it this way, last year's minimum wage increase and this year's minimum wage increase turned at 10%. So if you didn't adjust the rate last year, even this year, you might find that, the amount you think you've got built in has gone down a bit. So, you can only adjust someone's salary down by their mutual agreement. So good luck having that conversation and having them say yes.
and I think that's a really good point, actually. That question is that boot rates are indeed above award rates. So actually, some of the danger, if you like, is that actually you are building in extra time or allowances or penalties that actually that person isn't necessarily taking. So it can be I don't want to use danger. It's not, trepidatious. No one's gonna die from this, but you do have to consider when you do look at a boot, how much the business can afford in terms of adding in the buffer.
And how much do you want, and how much you want to build in there. And I mean, part of the conversation, if you don't give them much of an increase this year, is to say, look, we've always paid you like quite above the award, and we're still continuing to do that, but you get paid that rate. You're getting paid enough to work 40 hours a week and you only work 38 hours the majority of time. So you're still doing pretty okay. But just remember, the employee is just going to see that that's the rate that they're paid. You know, whilst from a business point of view, that's important. You offered that rate. That is the rate that they believe they received. They don't see it as, I'm getting this above the award rate. And to be honest, the award rate is the minimum. And I think that's what we always need to do. That's what you legally must pay. But, you know, for a lot of positions to attract and retain good people, you've got to pay above that anyway.
Another way to approach that, as we were just talking, and I'm sorry if I'm holding anyone up, is that show them the boot. And you can actually do a side-by-side comparison and say, well, this might, you know, if you're not intending to increase and you're still meeting award minimums, maybe that's the part of explanation is that conversation of saying we're not increasing this year because we've actually built in 2 hours. There's now the increase in minimum rates. We're absorbing that. And now we know you can work an extra 1 hour per week.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of the conversation. Again, there's lots of different ways to approach it.
Cost of living's gone up. Everyone's costs have gone up. You know, and I get that as a business owner myself. Like, your costs go up, but and increasing wages and things is a cost that also goes up. But at the same time, your employees' cost of living has also gone up. So, you know, I actually saw, I don't know if anyone saw on the news yesterday, there's a tech company in Australia that's offering $100,000 sign-on bonus to try and poach away from 2 of the other big tech companies in Australia because there's such a shortage of people. So, you know, I don't think we're quite at that place yet, but, you know, sometimes you have to look at what the downside will be if you have that conversation and how they'll respond to it. But, you know, and people are more than a cost, they're also the value they bring to your business.
Lots of options. Okay, if that's it for me for questions, I believe, unless anyone else wants to slip anything in.
Well, as always, if you do have any additional questions after the session, you're more than happy to reach out for our team. We do, you know, as I said, we're as soon as those rates drop, we are madly about to start doing, you know, at a minimum, probably about 100 plus audits. Some of those have up to like 50 or 60 people. So, you know, keep us in your thoughts. But we also do have a few of our clients that do every couple of years come back and just get us to do an audit for them just to make sure they are doing the right thing. And that's certainly something that you can reach out to our team if you do need help with. As always, this webinar will be recorded. It'll be posted on our website and YouTube. We will also be sending everyone that attended today a copy of the presentation as well as a recording over the next couple of days once that I have time to upload it to YouTube. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. Thank you for your questions. This has been the biggest registration we've ever had. We had over 100 people registered today, and we really appreciate everyone who's come along. And yeah, thank you for your support.
Have a good night.
Good night.